Although it may look vacant and practically empty now, imagine this place as an animated and lively town with a lot more buildings, horses, and well-worn roads. And people, of course. What you see here was once the heartland and capital of Cherokee Indian Territory. These buildings, rebuilt for this historic site, are isolated representations of this former fledgling township. This is New Echota, and it exists now as a memorial to the Cherokee people, and to tell the story of how, under the rule of European American settlers, these Native Americans became oppressed, defenseless, and eventually exiled from their homeland. The story is a grim tale, but it's important to never forget what happened here, and the sacrifices the Cherokee made during this tumultuous time in our nation's history. Since the first Europeans stepped on the shores of America, the Cherokee and other native tribes struggled to coexist with white settlers. And as European presence grew stronger, so too did their encroachment across the continent. While Cherokee Indian heritage taught the value of preserving and respecting the land for what it provided, the prerogative of white settlers was to dominate and conquer. Influences from Britain, France, and Spain, and the will to control the newfound land before other nations was the top priority. It was all bad news for Native Americans. Multiple conflicts had taken place by the 19th century, such as the Creek War and the Chickamauga Wars, between 1776 and 1794, where many of the native tribes are also involved in the concurrent American Revolutionary War with Great Britain. And by the early 1800s, whites had declared their independence from Britain and controlled most of the eastern portion of the country. That included large parts of Georgia, North and South Carolina, and parts of Tennessee, where they had claimed most of what surrounded Cherokee territory. During that time, the Cherokee had adopted much of white culture. Rather than being resistant to such change, the Cherokee were unique in that they believed if they were to assimilate and adapt to the culture, a culture that was an overwhelming and dominant force, then they might be able to retain their land. They thought, because white culture often referred to Native Americans as savages who needed to be civilized, the only thing influencing such oppression was the lifestyle and societal differences. Christianity, a democratic form of government, a written constitution, a written language, and a farming-based way of life are all things that were incorporated into Cherokee culture. But it wasn't enough. Once gold was discovered on Cherokee territory, which resulted in the Georgia Gold Rush around 1828, the fate of the Cherokee was effectively sealed. President Andrew Jackson revved up his crusade against the native people, being an advocate of Indian removal. In the land lottery of 1832, chunks of Cherokee soil were handed out among Georgia residents. Soon after, drafts for a treaty were written, negotiated, and eventually signed at the dismay of many a Cherokee family. That treaty was the Treaty of New Echota, signed right here at the Cherokee capital. A rather infamous document, it outlined terms for a non-combative plan for removal. Cherokee families were paid for the land and possessions, but no amount of money can make up for those lost along the Trail of Tears. In a 1,000-mile march westward, the Cherokee were forced to relocate in what is now modern-day Oklahoma. Close to 4,000 Native Americans died in that journey. This is why New Echota has been preserved and now rebuilt to commemorate the Cherokee and never forget their sacrifice. Now that you have some history, let's put that knowledge into context. The first thing any visitor to the New Echota site should know is that the land here covers more than a couple acres, so make sure you bring your walking shoes. What you'll find here is a quiet and relaxing learning experience. Bring yourself, family, or friends, enjoy the scenery, and really try to imagine each building and landmark as it were almost 200 years ago. You'll truly get to experience Cherokee life from the time, as charming as it is humble. On your tour, you start at a middle-class Cherokee farmstead. At this point, much time was spent growing and harvesting crops, and certain structures were essential to a productive farm. By 1837, over 4,000 similar estates stood in the Georgia section of the Cherokee Nation. Inside the cabin dwelling is a fully furnished recreation of what early 19th century middle-class Cherokee houses were like. At town center, you'll come face to face with the council house. A two-story establishment, each floor was designated for a different committee. Instead of a chief or leader, Cherokee legislature had two groups, a 32-member National Council and a 12-member National Committee. Bills brought before the council had to pass both houses before it could become a law. Much like U.S. government, council members were elected by the people. However, the executive branch was chosen by the council. This is the Supreme Courthouse. The Supreme Court met here annually to hear cases which were appealed from lower courts. Most of the cases brought here dealt with disputes over debts, while most criminal cases were handled in lower courts. The Cherokee had no prisons. Punishment consisted of fines, being whipped, or even hanged. 3 judges usually oversaw cases, and it's a nice view from the judge's bench. This tiny building is the print shop, and it was here where the Cherokee Phoenix, the first newspaper printed by and for the Cherokee Nation, was published. It combined both English and the then newly developed Cherokee written language, developed by a Cherokee native named Sequoyah in 1821. The first issue was published on February 21, 1828. With little funds to continue, the print shop closed down in 1834 and was later seized by the Georgia militia during the turmoil leading up to the signing of the Treaty of New Echota in 1835. The only original structure remaining here at New Echota is the beautiful Worcester House. It sits exactly as it did in the 1800s, plus a few renovations. It was built by Reverend Samuel A. Worcester and served as a Presbyterian mission station. Worcester was a white man who served the Cherokee by starting a church and school here at New Echota, and was also the town postmaster. During the Georgia land lotteries of 1832, the house was eventually given away after Worcester was arrested for not obtaining a permit from the state government for living on Cherokee territory. Later, he moved out west and continued to support the Cherokee, and this house was occupied by various families until it was eventually restored in 1952. Trading was a prominent practice in New Echota. People set up shop here to trade with residents and those just passing through. Many taverns like this one even had rooms for rent. This building is an original structure built around 1805 and is called Van Tavern. James Van was a wealthy Cherokee plantation owner. The tavern was actually moved here from what is now Forsyth County, Georgia, in 1955. It is an authentic artifact showing the types of shops that were prevalent from the time period. There is much else to see and learn here at New Echota, but this is where our journey ends. These lands, just like the stories they tell, are majestic and endearing. If at all interested in Native American history, or if you just like a nice quiet walk around some pieces of classic architecture, a visit to New Echota is a must. I hope you've enjoyed this video, and hopefully you've gained some new knowledge and perspective about the indigenous people of these United States, about U.S. history in general, and about human nature as well. Although the past may tell of great tragedy, there is much wisdom and beauty in learning how to better ourselves for the future.